So, is a lab leak theory still a theory that can be accepted? According to a recent publication, the answer is yes, and this is what we're going to be discussing in today's video. My name is Dr. Mikola Rashik of Neurogenomics. Before we get going, I just want to let you know, please stay till the end of the video to find out how you can get free tickets to some of our events. Alright, let's get going. So, a publication came out from Lancet, which is one of the most preeminent medical journal in the world, and this journal has established a commission already a while back. It was about, I believe it was 2020 that they established this commission, and the purpose of this commission was to study how pandemics can be suppressed, to study also what is the humanitarian crisis effect as a cause of a pandemic, and as well as what are the financial and economic fallouts from pandemics, and finally how to make a world a better place, how to make the world more sustainable and more equitable in the future. So, very generic statement, but very noble statement. And this commission is made up of more than 170 world experts. So likely this is probably the most preeminent and authoritative body so far assembled that I'm aware of. Maybe there are other ones that has been assembled to study the effects of pandemic. And in they have published different publications in the past with relation to the pandemic, and in the most recent one, they assessed the quality of response of the pandemic, as well as what might have been the origins of the pandemic. And probably this is the most bombastic claim they have made, because the origins of the pandemic, where the virus came from, is still not known. And currently it is believed that the virus has come from an animal, from a bat that has had a furin cleavage site in its spike protein, which is what helps to make this virus more infectious to humans. So this is what is referred to as a zoonotic spillover theory, and that basically means is that the virus came from an animal, infected a human, and then humans were infecting other humans, and that's how the pandemic started. But another theory is that the virus came as a consequence of what the authors refer to as research-related incident, and I'll explain in a moment as to why they use that specific nomenclature or those specific words. And basically this would have been where accidents in relation to human work on virus would have led to the pandemic. And the authors of this publication, this commission, claims that that possibility is still completely legitimate and therefore cannot be at the moment discounted. So why is that? Well, there are few contributing factors to this, I suppose, and they mention these, and that's what I want to let you know. So first of all, the furin cleavage site. I've talked about this in a few other videos already, this mysterious site. Why mysterious? Is because while furin cleavage site is present in many family members of the coronavirus family, so it's not alien to coronaviruses, it is not present in the family of coronaviruses to which the SARS viruses belong to. So SARS-CoV-2 would be the first of its kind. And on top of that, furin cleavage site has been subject ever since 2006, which was when the severe acute respiratory syndrome virus, which is what SARS stands for, emerged. The furin, both the virus as well as the furin cleavage site, has been subject of intense scientific research, including genetic manipulation, including insertion of the furin cleavage site into the SARS spike protein. And that, so clearly that kind of work has been done. But the conclusion is that, of these authors, is that if you look at the genetic sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, you cannot conclude the origin of the virus, and both of the possibilities are legitimate. Now, let's talk about this research-related incident. What do they mean by that? And the reason why they refer to it like this is because they claim there are 3 different possibilities of how, if this was because of human negligence, how this could have arisen. So number 1 is simply the possibility that a researcher was infected in the field while collecting samples. And then the other 2 possibilities I'm about to mention would be what would amount to basically what we can refer to as lab leak theory. So number 2 is a researcher got infected with the virus while working on a natural virus in a lab and then spread it to others. And then number 3 is a researcher got infected while genetically manipulating the virus in a lab and then started spreading that to others. Now, the reason why all these possibilities are still legitimate is because we don't know at all as to where this virus came from. Neither the location or the animal source has ever been identified. Of course, the favorite theory is that it came from the wet market in Wuhan, although that has been also disputed to some degree by others. But that's not the point of this video. And however, there also has not been any independent and transparent scientific investigation with regards to any type of work that has been done prior to COVID-19 pandemic on the SARS viruses, including their genetic manipulation. Not a single laboratory or no laboratories in the US have released information for such independent investigation with regards to either the lab notebooks or emails, any databases or samples. None of that has been made available for investigation at all, as well as that has not been done or made available from the Wuhan laboratory where the research was done as well. Furthermore, the American National Institute of Health has absolutely resisted in releasing any information with regards to this type of work that they have funded, unless they have been legally forced to through the Freedom of Information Act. And even then, and this is, by the way, how we have learned that US has funded the research in Wuhan, where they're doing crazy research, where basically the scientists were splicing different coronaviruses together and attempting to make them more infectious against humanized mice. And even when NIH finally did release this type of information, wind draft. Even when they did release that information, I gotta get out of here, too much wind. That information was heavily redacted. So the point is that there's been a lot of resistance in making it available for us to understand what kind of research has been done on coronaviruses prior to the emergence of the pandemic. So anything goes at this point. We still don't know, and therefore either of these options are viable options. So that's definitely been probably the most bombastic claim of that commission, but it's a very, very large report, and they analyze basically how different entities responded to the pandemic, and no one came unscathed from the commission's criticism. So World Health Organization has been heavily criticized by the commission that they were basically acting too slow and too timidly in being able to properly inform the world on numerous grounds. And they mentioned, for example, first, they failed to rapidly inform the public that asymptomatic human transmission was taking place. They also failed to rapidly announce this outbreak as a public health emergency of international concern. And the authors of this publication commission claim that, you know, this kind of nomenclature, these words, are probably not the best way of calling it like that, because it might fail to properly announce the importance of the issue to the world. I'm dealing with some wind. Number 3, they failed to rapidly inform the world that we should consider travel bans to limit the spread of the pandemic. Remember when this was originally considered, the idea was floated around that this would be equivalent to being racist. They also failed to properly inform the world about the importance of use of protective gear and masks. And finally, and this is also extremely important, they also failed to notify the world in appropriate, timely manner about the fact that this virus was spreading through airborne transmission. So a lot of failures from the World Health Organization in being able to act appropriately based on the powers that have been invested in them in order to help the world be protected from such events. Now, the governments also got verbal spanking. Everyone did. And the governments failed to, first of all, take the outbreak seriously when it was already known at the start of January 2020 that we're dealing with a serious event Very few governments acted with any urgency on that. And governments also failed to properly coordinate with each other in terms of response once the urgency was understood. And also the authorities, governmental authorities, in many instances they really didn't know what they're dealing with, so the humanity was subjected to being informed by authorities that were either ignorant about what is going on or were forced to learn rapidly or had ulterior motives in terms of how the information was disseminated to the public. And this is really interesting. The authors even say that in some instances, the way they phrased it, some of the statements made by the authorities were, and this is what they said, bordered on the absurd. So very interesting words to say. So governments failed as well. And then finally, the public also failed to act appropriately by resisting many of the public health and social measures, such as wearing masks or getting vaccinated, which the authors of this commission report claim all of this contributed to the horrible outcomes of this pandemic in terms of its death toll. And the death toll that they quote, by May of 2022, approximately 7 million people were already died because of COVID or with COVID. And they mentioned that it is estimated that approximately almost 20 million more people might have died for same reasons without ever being registered of this. So the death toll could be enormous as a consequence of this pandemic. And of course, we're still in it. All right. So right now, what next thing is, what should we do to end the pandemic now? And let's see, I wanted to show you some of this beautiful coastline. And this is what they recommend. Number one, continue with mass vaccination. Now this is, I find this interesting, is because literally in just the previous video I was mentioning that another group of authors were saying that you can't end the pandemic anymore with vaccination. And the reason why is because vaccines cannot stop transmission post-infection. And on top of that, you have animal reservoirs. So there's some discrepancy here that I'm not really sure why, but I suspect that it's perhaps that the reason why these authors mention, of course, to continue with mass vaccination to end the COVID-19 pandemic is in association with all of the other points they also mention, which I'm about to tell you, which I completely agree with as well. Because number two, they mention we need to continue with testing, and we're talking about use of affordable testing so that the scale is appropriate. Number three, we need to treat infections with medications. Those are the new infections as well as long COVID impact. Number four, we need to we need to continue with certain public health and social measures as required. So this is wearing masks, for example. Number 5, make the workplaces safe environments for work. That definitely makes sense, especially where there is a very high exposure to high-risk individuals. So you can imagine assisted living homes for elderly or hospitals. And number 6 is provide financial and social assistance to those who have to isolate as a consequence of being infected. And that obviously makes sense, because personal quarantine is one of the best way to obviously mitigate spread of infection. But in order for that to be effective, with how frequently people can now be infected again and again, you need to be able to, you can't just take 10 days or whatever off work every so many weeks, right? There has to be a method to be able to still achieve this, but without impacting your ability to continue your normal standard of living. So that's what we need. What do the governments need to do in the future or governments and organizations in the future, in terms of making sure we didn't deliver the same level of fiasco as this commission claims we have witnessed with the current pandemic? Is clearly governments need to be able to coordinate and cooperate on a much better level when it comes to emergence of infectious diseases, in terms of sharing information, warning each other, spreading the scientific information, and so on. We also need to continue, and this is a very important point they made, we need to continue investigating the origin of the current pandemic, and that's both the possibility of the natural origin as well as the research-related incident origin. And the reason why we need to do this is because we need to understand how this pandemic started, so we know how to prevent pandemics in the future. So that research and investigation should continue. So there's definitely a strong call for that. And as a consequence, governments as well as international organizations should work towards preventing either one of these taking place in the future. So that also includes, in terms of natural origin or zoonotic spillover outbreaks, that includes greater cooperation in terms of animal trade and introducing greater international protective measures against dangerous practices. And then, despite all of the failures of World Health Organization in terms of how they responded to the pandemic, the authors claim that World Health Organization should be empowered further and be the entity that will be regulating and monitoring any type of future scientific research related to dangerous pathogens, including their genetic manipulation, and monitoring the biosafety of this type of research. Because right now there isn't really a coordinated international regulatory system in place with regards to this type of dangerous scientific research that, as you can see, if SARS-CoV-2 were to turn out to be as a product of human engineering, you could see how dangerous scientific research of dangerous pathogen could be. And this is not in terms of whether COVID-19 did emerge from such a source. It's to make sure that this doesn't actually happen, period, in the future. So that's another step, obviously step forward. And finally, the commission was also mentioning what are the current threats in the current moment where we stand right now. So we mentioned how we could be ending the pandemic, but what are the current threats? And number one is the fact that the virus could still mutate itself at any point to still become more infectious and more deadly. This I found very interesting, because I'll have to look at the references as to why they actually think this, because that's a very interesting threat to mention. But it's true, obviously. We still don't know. We're not out of the pandemic, and we don't know what will happen with the future variants. Number two, they claim is that we have too many unvaccinated people in the world, where still approximately 33% of the world is unvaccinated, and as a consequence of that, that might help development of still new variants. But what I found perplexing about that particular threat is that, and I forgot to mention this earlier, one of the governmental failures that they also mentioned was too early lifting of those public health and social measures. So for example, telling the public to stop wearing masks or stopping the lockdowns. And as a consequence, the Omicron wave had an enormous impact on the population. And at its peak in January 2022, the authors of this publication, or the commission, claims that 45 million people were being infected per day. Like, that's per day. And between December of 2021 and May of 2022, 4.3 billion people got infected, which is 54% of the entire world in just those 6 months. Just absolutely staggering, astonishing numbers. So, and that was just still back then. Since then, we had other Omicron variants that were even more infectious. So the reason why I found that statement about the threat of unvaccinated is because, once again, it's as if it negates the impact of natural infection and the protection, that immunological protection that survivors of natural infections would have. And clearly, with such a massive level of infections that have been seen since the end of last year, such enormous number of people have already been infected that many of those unvaccinated would already have natural immunity protection. So yeah, I will have to perhaps look at those references and understand in greater detail as to why the authors consider this as still a threat to the public well-being, despite the fact that obviously natural infection provides some level of protection as well. And then third one, which I found somewhat contradictory with the second one, is the authors mention, oh, by the way, despite being highly vaccinated, that still doesn't give you protection, as Omicron clearly demonstrated, so that you still could have a dangerous effect even in highly vaccinated areas of the world. So I found these a little bit contradictory, but here you go. Basically, these were the different, some of the major statements that I took out from that publication that I wanted to share with you. All right, if you're still with me, I wanted to let you know we do have another COVID-19 Q&A event coming up. So if you want free tickets to that, the first 10 subscribers to our newsletter post this video will send you a free ticket. If you already are a subscriber and you never managed to get a ticket, just email us, and if we have free tickets available, we'll definitely send you one. And basically these Q&A events, it's I answer some questions that we pull out of YouTube channel, and then it's open mic and we chat. So questions that different people bring in, and some of them are beyond my ability to answer on the spot, but the cool thing is that I always try to research the information afterwards, and we provide summaries to the participants. And I really enjoy this because, of course, I get access to sometimes brand new scientific information related to COVID-19 that I wouldn't even think of looking at. So there's always that option. So check it out. And then we have another event. This is for business owners that would be interested in providing wellness program to their employees to improve their well-being. And it's a program I developed with two other experts, financial experts for financial well-being, mental health expert for obviously mental health well-being, and myself for physical well-being, but with regards to use of genetics in order to determine how best to help your physical well-being in the future. So a little bit of different spin on things. So if you like this content, please give us a like, please share the video, please leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we love to see you again. And I look forward to seeing you in another future installment. Bye everyone.